All right, what's going on? Let's get this thing started. Okay, get the chat popped out. Everybody ready to go? So again, tonight is more or less going to be run as you guys run it. You give me some sense of the things you want to go over, whether it's specific questions, whatever it might be. I'll stop moving in and out of the camera, hopefully to let it focus in a little bit better. It's kind of not doing a very good job at the moment. Let me see if I can fix that a bit. Configure video. Camera. Low light compensation. Yeah, I guess turn that on. Okay. Apply. Okay. Alright, hopefully that should clear it a little better. Alright, so let me know in the chat if you can hear me, please. Let's just get that out of the way. Make sure that we're coming in alright. Start putting up your questions or issues or whatever it might be. Oh, that's not bad. It's actually a pretty decent delay. Alright, can you go over Earl China? Who's Earl China? You mean early China? What I say about having typos when we type, we have to work on that. Let's go. Like Sui Tong Song and the Mongols. Yeah, sure. Alright, so first off, let's remember a couple things about those groups, right? So not all of them are in the scope of the test. Okay? For example, Sui and Tong are you're talking before the test even starts. So now, they're good, though, in the sense that they're good for context. So I'll give you an example. China basically goes like this, right? It's dynastic sort of progression. So you have the Zhou dynasty that leads to... Wow, that really went out of focus. Jesus. Sorry. Hold on. Come on, come on, come on. Work, work, work. Okay, I'm just blurry. Hold on, let me shut off the auto. Let me shut off the auto. Whatever it's doing, because it's not doing it. Autofocus. Apply. Okay. Now we're going to manually apply. Where are you, video? Here we are. Okay. So, focus. There we go. See? Better. Okay. Apply okay. No autofocus required. Very good. Okay. That should work much better now. Alright, so let's go back to that idea of China. So, Zhou dynasties first. They last for a very long period of time. It is in the Zhou dynasty that Confucius is born, as well as a lot of the other philosophies like Taoism get developed. Remember, the Zhou was a period of a long period of relative feudalistic style peace, followed by an extended warring states period that meant that Chinese state was battling Chinese state for supremacy. That matters because one of the things that really, really matters about any culture is their kind of foundational elements. Like, what is the world they're born into? Shang doesn't matter at all. You can ignore Shang completely. Shang is not going to be on the test at all. And by the way, keep the questions piling up in the chat. I'd rather have some waiting for me than me fishing for them when I'm done talking about something. So anyway, because society was a non-stop series of on again, off again conflicts, it became a situation where it was much clearer to everybody that peace and order and harmony was far more important than something like morality. And so that kind of colors the way Chinese view everything from that point forward. And so you get these systems where a guy like the first emperor of the Qin, who is a brutal authoritarian, but nevertheless is an effective administrator of controlling the country and bringing about peace and conquering the thing, people would rather see peace than perfection. So you do get that kind of model in Chinese rule, and that pretty much stays true throughout all of its imperial history. So the Han, even though they overthrow the Qin dynasty, not the Qin, not too long into their rule, they do keep a huge proportion of the laws and organizations and bureaucracy that the Qin put in place. Now the Han definitely take that to a new level, and that's why the Han are considered the classical civilization of China. But make no mistake, it is absolutely the case that the Qin lay those very foundations, and then the Han adopt them. Now the Han last for about 400 years, give or take, 200 BCE to 200 AD, and then they disintegrate into another period of disunity. And following that period of disunity, which lasts for about 300-ish years, you get the Sui. Now, the Sui are kind of important because they come back in around, just say right around 600-ish. And so the Sui dynasty reunites China, but does so with kind of a shaky foundation where they have to appease both northern Chinese, a lot of whom don't have any real traditions in Confucianism, at least not in the scholarship level. It's mostly the subconscious. And Buddhism, which had made its way into China at the end of the Han, and now had become a very powerful force within China. So 100%, I would say, the value of understanding the Sui is understanding now the new issue of a foreign religion in Buddhism being introduced as a real political force in China. The Sui also don't last particularly long, though they do build the majority of the Grand Canal, a fantastic piece of workmanship that does actually do a great job of ensuring northern China stays connected to southern China. They're overthrown by one of their own generals, and that starts the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty is going to last, again, about 350, 400 years until they're overthrown. Again, a brief period of disunity, and then you get the Song Dynasty. Now, the Song should be on the test, okay? So, here, let's corner cam this thing. Wikipedia. All right. So, Song Dynasty, just... Yeah, oh, God. In theory, the very end of the song is within the scope of the test. So that is still a definite possibility. What would you get about the song? You'd get stuff about the kind of commercial enterprise of the song, the nature of song rule, how it worked, and so on. And what I would say about that is it's definitely the Southern Song era. So what's the difference between the Northern Song and the Southern Song? Well, a map would be helpful here. I don't know if one's available. There we go. Perfect. So this is the Southern Song. The Southern Song era is characterized by northern China being conquered by those Jurchen guys. That was the old name of the Manchus. They'll be back for the Qing dynasty, but they come from up over here-ish, okay? And that old name of theirs is Jurchen. They take over the northern part of China and call themselves the Jin dynasty. And in not too long a time period, the Mongols will sweep in from up over here, take out both the Western Xia, who are a Tartar dynasty, another group of nomads, take out the Jin under Temujin, Temujin as the conquering Mongol takes them out, but never does get a hold of southern China. It's actually later on that southern China is actually taken over by Kublai Khan. So the basic idea is the Southern Song dynasty is the one you're likely to come across on the test. So Southern Song is really well known for commercial enterprise, businesses, things like a cosmopolitan urban atmosphere. For sure, during the Southern Song dynasty, and even during the Northern Song dynasty, the Confucian scholar became preeminent. It was no longer a case, which had been true in the early parts of China, it was no longer the case that an aristocrat born into privilege would be competing with Confucian scholars for jobs. Remember, early in Chinese history, you were much more likely to get a job as an aristocrat in government than as a Confucian scholar. That tilts the other way, and by the Song dynasty, everybody in government, more or less, is a Confucian scholar. So that's certainly true during the Song dynasty, and that does, in fact, color the nature of things. So you get certain styles of art, like what that's sometimes there you go right there. This is what's called literati art, or scholar, or the Confucian scholarship style of art, where human beings are seen as figures within a wider nature. Okay, basically something like kind of like human as a part of nature, not as master of nature. It has some Taoist elements in it, and a lot of that also comes from the fact that you get the Neo-Confucians in this time. So if we look at Neo-Confucianism, hold please on that. It'll be here somewhere. Okay, I don't want to wait anymore. Okay, so Neo-Confucianism is created by this guy, Zhu Xi. And Zhu Xi is a scholar who understood that the competitive element of Buddhism in China was actually quite difficult for Confucians to deal with. Buddhism was very, 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 very popular. So, in order to take away some of the political teeth that Buddhist monasteries had actually developed because they become so popular among the everyday person, Zhu Xi took the traditional teachings of Confucianism and wrapped within them the sort of most attractive elements of Taoism and Buddhism, recreating a new Confucian ideal where Confucian theory and Confucian scholars were still supreme, make no mistake, but it also incorporated into things like the civil service exam some Buddhist texts and some Taoist texts and things like that as a way to sort of claim them as really the domain of Confucian scholarship. So it became something where being a Confucian scholar also included being these other things, and it also meant that there was less separation between them all. This actually was really, really successful in setting up Confucianism as preeminent in China at the time, and kept it going forward at that point. Kept it going from that point forward. This had some negative consequences. For example, this helped to reinforce some gender roles within Chinese society, where women would have been second-class citizens under Confucianism. They became even more so under Neo-Confucianism. Ideas like foot binding and so forth follow in the wake of these philosophical changes. Where, again, this idea that women don't have a public face, women are not part of the public discourse, and as a result, you can effectively cripple them and bound them to the home by making it so that everyday travel would be very difficult for them to do because they can't walk as easily as other people if they go through a foot binding procedure. I mean, there was a lot more to it than that. I don't want to make it seem quite so grim, but that was part of sort of clearly the outcomes of Neo-Confucianism was to reestablish a lot of traditional Confucian values and absorb the elements of Buddhism and Taoism that had become so popular in China, and again reassert Confucianism as a philosophy that ran the country, not just sort of a foundational cultural element. And he was very, very successful in doing that. Now, the Yuan will take over everybody in two phases. So you have the conquest of northern China by, again, Temujin, and then Kublai will finish the job in around 1260, 70. It says 1271, so that might be exactly right. No, let's see. 1279, when the Southern Song was defeated at the Battle of Yamen. So there you go. So he doesn't actually get the Southern Song completely conquered until the 1280, let's say, just to round it off. So that's well within the framework of the course, right? So the Yuan Mongol rule is like there at the start of the course. The Mongol Empire is right there at the start of the course. Now, this dynasty does not last long. It lasts less than 100 years. Why is that? Well, simple. They're not popular. They rule China as foreign invaders who don't really follow Chinese custom. And so in not following Chinese custom, they are inevitably going to be disliked. On top of that, the old Mongol rules applied, which was the more you resisted, the worse you were going to be treated when the resistance was crushed. And since the southern Chinese, the Han Chinese, had held out longer than anybody against the wave of early Mongol conquests, when they were conquered, they were reduced to the lowest of the lowest of the lowest in society. And that also meant that the Mongol rulership was not particularly interested in having Chinese subordinates run the country. So they, as we know, we talked about this, they imported a lot of Persians and others from sort of Central Asia to help run the country as actual administrators and bureaucrats, which infuriated the Chinese. How did the Qing maintain rule for so long then? Because the Qing didn't do that. I'll get back to those questions in a minute. The Qing did not rule like that. The Qing did not rule like Mongols ruled. Remember, Kublai famously, where the hell is that picture? There, so here's Kublai, right? Now, that's not a Chinese emperor. If you look at that garb, that's a Mongolian. Chinese emperors, always have the traditional crown with a little curtain in front of them, and usually in a brocade robe that is, that's silk with applique designs and emblems on it. This is a Mongolian, right? But if you look at some of the art that came out, like, you get stuff that clearly shows that he had much less interest in being just nothing but a Mongolian ruler. So I'm trying to find some of the art here that goes along with this. The one I'm really thinking of is Kublai Hunting. It's a very famous art piece. I've shown it to you guys. This is the one. So here's Kublai hunting, right? But this is a clear piece of propaganda. Because if you look at this actual image, the whole thing of it at least, this is not the whole image. So, all right, but you do see Kublai, where is he at? Here's a guy with his sort of falconers and so on. So here's Kublai, and he's wearing a fur coat. We talked about this. That's ermine. That's squirrel belly. That's his wife there. They're out on this hunt, and he's wearing robes that, this is consistent with Mongol garb, for sure. But you can tell, again, it's painted by Chinese. And one of the ways you can tell that is look at how these people are depicted, right? I don't know who this fellow is, but I don't think there were too many Africans in the court of the Mongols. I think that more than likely this is how they depicted a Persian. And simply just made him extraordinarily dark-skinned as a way of sort of showing that, this was a kind of a barbarian figure. But if you look at the full image, at the top you have these merchants here. I don't know if I can zoom in enough to really see it. We'll try. No, it's not working. But these camel merchants over here, over these like desert dunes, it's a piece of propaganda. It's meant to show, like, oh yeah, the Mongols, we're not just here to conquer. We're also people who protect the Silk Road and so on. And so that was just an example of like kind of his propaganda. But in the end of the day, they don't manage to keep their dynasty in power for really very long at all. And as a result, you do get the end of that dynasty. Now, the fall of this dynasty is from a... let me find it. Well, I guess let's do it this way, because someone asked about it anyway. Here. The fall of the Yuan dynasty is consistent with the exact same time as the rise of the Ming dynasty, right? So, the Ming were started by a peasant who rose to power in an actual... well, here you go. Rose to power in a peasant-driven revolution meant to overthrow the foreign barbarian Mongols who they hated. It was largely a sort of a feature of southern China. Others joined in as well. It wasn't just peasants. It was also aristocrats. It was even funded by aristocrats who had maintained their wealth and money and privilege, and in some cases their food supplies by their plantations or their large farming operations they had along, say, the Yangtze River Valley. So this was without a doubt, this was a sort of a traditional return to China. And once this guy takes power, someone asked, what can I tell you about the Ming? Well, the Ming suffered early on, especially from a lot of struggles regarding the succession crisis early on. So if you read a little bit about it, you can find out these sort of details are not really going to be a huge issue. Probably the most important of the early emperor kind of curiosities is something like the Zheng He missions. So here is a giraffe that was presented as a gift to the emperor via these Zheng He missions. Remember I told you that they thought that this was a qilin, which is one of the sort of sacred heaven-sent animals of Chinese culture. And so it really kind of caught their eye as something like, oh, that's a great gift. Yeah, we'll take that. But remember also at the whole ordeal of sending Zheng He out on his missions, I mean, a couple of things about that. So where is he at? Where's my boy? No, Yongle Emperor. Here he is. So, here's Zheng He. Zheng He, remember, is a Muslim, sort of mixed Chinese-born Muslim, who was a eunuch. We talked about what that means. And served the emperor's court directly. He was not a Confucian scholar, nothing like it. And he was made the admiral of the Chinese Navy. Now, again, the Chinese are not expansionary people, especially when it comes to seafaring, generally speaking. So there really wasn't such a thing as like massive navies or fleets of Chinese ships that would sail around the world. That was not a feature of Chinese history ever. So this mission was really an anomaly. And that's kind of its most important kind of thing, is that it's often like assumed, like, yeah, of course, like Europeans are going around the world and exploring. Why wouldn't the Chinese? Because they just wouldn't. That's just not how they are. They're insular people. They're ethnocentric. They think their thing is the best. You don't need stuff from other parts of the world, so why seek it out? And so this was a flash in the pan, an unusual circumstance that happens, and that's what really makes it stand out. Now, the Ming are best known really for the reestablishment of Chinese society. Again, it's make China great again mentality. It's not even just we want China run by Chinese. We want China to be run by Chinese, and we want this China to be the most China that's ever China ever. And that would even imply things like taking parts of Chinese history and romanticizing them in a way that really is not what they were. And I mean, frankly, a good example of this is The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which was a historical novel written during the Ming. But it was written during the Ming about the fall of the Han Dynasty and the civil war that ended the Han Dynasty. And it is a proper romance, meaning not romance in this case. So here, okay, let's do this. So what is romance genre literature? So, so it's not love stories. Okay, that's not typical. That's not what I want. It's not a love story. It's a romanticization. It's thinking about things in an idealized sense that often is only loosely based on reality, and that's exactly what this was. And this is a great example of their whole attitude towards Chinese history. They wanted to make China in the Ming Dynasty sort of like a propaganda project to remind the world as well as themselves that they were the greatest empire. This Mongol thing was a blip. Don't worry about it. And not only are we back, but we're back in the most traditional possible way you can imagine. Now, I don't want to make the Ming seem like a bunch of jokers. They're not. They were a very powerful empire, militarily quite powerful. They took real serious concern about the possible return of the Mongols in the north. They did rebuild the Great Wall of China. They were a very, very successful dynasty. They were also the first Chinese dynasty to make significant European contact, and even had occasionally European members of, or Europeans who were invited to be a part of the court, not run anything, but be like visiting guests of the court, like Matteo Ricci and so on. So this is going to start a lot of that process. In fact, the earliest sort of trade arrangements in China with Europeans happened between the Portuguese and the Ming, not the Qing. Now, I'm going to take a quick look at some of these questions. So the Qing doesn't really matter that much. It doesn't matter at all. The stream is stuttering, though it's probably on my end. I don't know. It could be. I mean, I'm on the best Wi-Fi signal I have available to me. I'm on my 5G, so I can't do any better than that. Hopefully it's not stuttering too much if it's still a problem. I can go over those revolutions. Hang tight, we'll get to that in a minute. Would you say it's typically more... There is very little European content on the test. Very, very little. And the reason why is very simple. They sell a test called AP Euro, and they don't want to cannibalize those sales. So yeah, Europe's a part of the world, but just like there's very little American information on this test, anything that's European is almost always going to be done in such a way that it's how European actions affect the world or Europe's role in the world. It's not going to really be domestic very much. So like you won't really get questions about the Reconquista, but you will get questions about how Crusader attitudes towards Muslims inform the way Europeans will conquer the New World. Like you will get stuff about that. Could you go over Ming China? Yeah, like I said, I'm pretty much going over it now as we speak. How did the Qing maintain rule? I guess we'll get to that in a minute. Hello, Kevin Watson. Is it fine if I just know about the song instead of the other dynasties like the Tang Sui and the others? I'm going to assume that's like I know about the other Chinese dynasties, but beyond Unit 1, I'm just curious if it matters. All right. I don't like to make broad statements about what you should or shouldn't know. You are not required nor responsible to know the history, events, people, places of any of the dynasties prior to, say, the Song Dynasty. That doesn't mean it's a wise decision to go in blind with it. Like I said, all essays need context. So you're going to want to write, you're going to want to know some. So that's kind of my general statement on that. All right, let me wrap up the Ming and the Qing, and then we'll get over to those revolutions, okay? So the Ming Dynasty, as I said, they rule with a great deal of stability, make those first European contacts. But what happens? What happens is the Ming emperors make a kind of curious decision. The early Ming emperors, in particular, especially the first Ming emperor, really didn't trust Confucians because he wasn't a Confucian. He was a peasant. He was an illiterate peasant, and he didn't trust Confucians. And so he tried to check the power of Confucian scholars, the very people who had helped him rise to power because these Confucian scholars were also the rich landlords and so on of southern China. So as a part of sort of his early program, he leans more heavily into other areas of government rather than the Confucian bureaucracy. And in doing so, this does create a weird dynamic where the centralization of government and the power of government is being not so much checked, that's not the right word, but redirected in very specific ways by the emperor themselves. Now, as you get into a succession struggle over the first few emperors, it becomes pretty clear that running the Qing, Yowza, okay, so it becomes pretty clear that you've got an issue where the central part of government, the head of government, the head of state, the emperor, down the line, more emperors come, but all of them begin to really have a kind of a hands distance relationship with the Confucian bureaucracy. And this manifests in a decision to create within the capital of Beijing the Forbidden City, which was literally meant to be a way to isolate the emperor and the emperor's court away from the bureaucracy so that way they could have more control over what is done, how, and where. The problem is, it's like the equivalent of somebody saying, I've built a nice closet in my house. I'm going to go into that closet anytime I want to make an important decision. You're not allowed in the closet unless I invite you in the closet. Whatever decisions come out of this closet, well, that's the closet, that's the decisions I'm making. That works all well and good if you, the leader, are hyper aware that once you put barriers, in this case, these are physical barriers, right? It's a physical location. Once you put barriers between yourself and your subordinates, those subordinates are going to need guidance. And if they don't get guidance, they'll simply fill in the blanks however they feel they need to fill them in. And if they're not carefully watched, they'll fill in that blank with corruptive elements that benefit them individually. And naturally, as happens with every dynasty anywhere in the world, over time, the quality of your average emperor is going to go down and down and down. And so you do get to the point where there are emperors who, as has happened in past dynasties as well, where they simply are not interested in governance and they want to just have the benefit of being the emperor. So, running things is difficult and it's a lot of work, and not a lot of people actually want the responsibilities. But again, they would offset that responsibility by basically granting decision-making powers to their subordinates. Now, if you have a bureaucracy, that's possible. Because you just take the head of the army and say, listen, man, I don't know nothing about running an army. I'm not really interested about running an army. You run the army. And you could get away with that. But that's not what these emperors did. They because they're isolated in the Forbidden City, the only people with them are their courts. And that includes things like the eunuchs of the court, like Zheng He used to be. And these guys will start to basically dictate out from Beijing what the emperor's will is, whether or not the emperor actually said that. And so, naturally, the more that this goes on, the less actual control you have over anything. And the more that these people you've sort of seceded or ceded control to them, the more they're in a position to do things that are in their own interest and not in the country's interest and not in the emperor's interest. And that eventually does lead to very bad governance, a series of problems, disasters they can't overcome, and voila, rebellion. Now that rebellion crushes the Ming Dynasty. And we talked about how in an attempt at either desperately saving the country or desperately saving his own hide, one of the Ming generals actually allows the Manchus, who will become the Qing, back into the country. These were the guys that once made the Jin Dynasty, back into the country under the guise of, if you save us and if you put down this rebellion, we'll give you a lot of money. Of course, naturally, once they took over the capital, they don't need to get paid anymore. They can just access the treasury and take everything they want. In fact, why get paid at all? Let's just stay here. And they did. And the Ming and the Qing dynasty simply stayed. And after putting down a number of revolutions from Chinese who didn't want to be ruled by the Qing, eventually those Manchus do consolidate power and make the Qing dynasty. Now I was asked, how is it that the Qing are able to maintain power for so long as a foreign ruler of China, but the Mongols were not? Simple. The Qing did not. The Qing were smart enough not to dismiss the core functions of Chinese society. In fact, the Manchus had been really cynicized by their first sort of stint running northern China. You have to remember, China it's not like there was an optional way of living in this part of the world. If you wanted to run a government in a major civilization, the Chinese model was the only model you had to go on. The Japanese didn't do this. The Koreans didn't do this. The Vietnamese didn't do this. These are small states without anything like the kind of problems, issues, and logistical concerns that China's got. So if China had a good model for running a country, you'd be a damn fool if you conquer China and use a different model. And the Mongols tried to use a different model, and it was an absolute mistake. And it ended up making the problems that the Mongols led to, got them thrown out of China. But at the same time, the Qing are not the same kind of people. They're not northern nomads who don't want to live like Chinese. They're northern nomads who were basically already living like Chinese. I mean, simple as that. And they knew the language of China, the main dialect, the Mandarin dialect. These are not, again, these are not quite as foreign as they originally seem. Just kind of keep that in mind. And they'll stay there until basically they're tossed out by a attempted revolution to create a republic in China in 1910. All right, let's see. All right, I can answer Cole's question real easy, and then we'll do these revolutions. Yeah, so listen, here's the bottom line. Straight up. Same answer. If it happened before 1200, you're not directly responsible for it. So do you have to know feudal Europe? No, but once again, if you're given a question about, I don't know what, colonialism, feudal Europe is a good context for that. Like, what got us to this point? Again, no one says you're going to... There really isn't a lot of material in terms of fact that they target anyway. Remember that. It's all broad topics. Yes, they're linked to time periods, though. So, no, you're not going to get a question about feudalism. It's just not. Can you talk about the start of communism? Yeah, I'm going to get to that because that kind of falls a little bit into this revolutionary thing. I also have a video on that kind of stuff. Again, I have that playlist I'm going to share with you guys in school tomorrow. All right, so let's start talking about these revolutions. Okay. French, American, Haitian. Well, let's put them in order first off. Let's start there. Okay, so it's American, Haitian, then French. Okay? No, sorry, it's late for me. American, French, then Haitian. So, and you can make the argument the Haitian Revolution happens in the middle of the French. It depends how you qualify the French Revolution. So, the American Revolution, let's talk about revolution in general. In Europe, what actually brings Europeans out of the Middle Ages is two major things. One's an economic shift, one's a philosophical shift. Here we go. The economic shift is the commercial revolution, not to be confused with the industrial revolution. The commercial revolution is one where the nature of the economy of Europe, this farming, agriculture, serf-based, I never said the Latin American revolutions don't matter. I made a big deal about the last, 2 nights ago, saying that they really do matter and you really should read up on them. I definitely did not say that. Okay, nope, didn't say that. So you definitely should know them. They matter. There's sometimes entire DBQs on them. They're going to matter a whole lot if you get that thing. So anyway, back to the American Revolution. All these revolutions in the Western world. And the Latin American revolutions as well. All of them come from the fact that two major changes happen in feudalism. Firstly, commercial revolution. The nature of change from an agricultural society that does basically barter to the reinvigoration of commerce within Western Europe. And this included things like the beginnings of proto-industrialization, meaning the foundational ideas and sort of small-scale things like the cottage system, the putting out system for goods to be made and things like that, that happened before industry proper occurs. The other big one, beyond the commercial revolution, which included things like banking and credit and stuff like that, which really hadn't existed in the feudal times. The other big one is going to be the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment is a thing you should know the big ideas of. Now, I'm going to help you through that. So, it's the 16th century, give or take, when it starts. And the basic ideas of the Enlightenment are that it's a challenge to political order. So humanism, back in the Renaissance, was a challenge to the religiosity of the world of Western Europe. It was a challenge to the idea that human life was supposed to suck. This was the medieval thinking. Human life was supposed to suck. Like, yes, a peasant serf has a hard life, and you're supposed to. Having a good life would actually be immoral, unethical, and sinful. Because God sent Jesus to die for your sins. He suffered. If you're going to walk in Jesus' steps, you should suffer too. And suffering was moral. It's so moral that it's actually helping to prepare you for your spiritual afterlife, which is the true reward. So put your nose down, get back to work, don't question God's order of things, accept the suffering of humankind, and that way you'll be more spiritually worthy of God's love when you finally die and it's time for you to go to heaven. This was the medieval thinking. Renaissance humanism challenges that and says, no, 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 wait a minute. Humanity is not sinful. The human condition is not sinful. In fact, if God created humans in his image, which the Bible says he does, and God gives you all these capacities for thought, for speech, for physical activity, for athletic activity, for singing, for dancing, for a wide range of emotions to experience joy and sorrow and fear and ambition. These are not sinful if God gave these to you. So, what would be the real sin to a humanist of the Renaissance was to not explore all the possibilities that you have as a human. And that's where this idea of the Renaissance man comes from. Somebody who can do a little bit of everything and tries to do as much of it as well as they can. So this is a huge feature of all this, okay? Now, that really informs the Renaissance thinkers of Italy and then later the Renaissance thinkers of the Northern Renaissance. But it doesn't really change the average person's life. The Renaissance does not really change the average person's life. But it does lead knock-on effects into the exploration of, again, the human capacity, which leads to something called the scientific revolution, which was the ideas that began to challenge some of the traditional authority figures on religious-based ideas, like the Earth being the center of the universe being challenged by Copernicus, who says, no, 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 no. Sorry, you're too old to ask that. I don't remember asking a question. Maybe I did. But anyway, so the bottom line was, okay, so the scientific revolution was a challenge to some of the traditional sources of authority. Keep that in mind because you'll notice the progression, right? Medieval thinking into Renaissance thinking into scientific revolution, and then we're going to get into Enlightenment. So the scientific revolution says we can, through observation, we can sort of examine that and decide, is this logical? Like, okay, sure, I can look up in the sky and I can see that the sky is moving, the clouds are moving, the sun is moving. I can understand why somebody would think the Earth is the center of the universe. Sure, it passes like the sniff test. But if you do math, and the Greeks did this back in the days of the Greeks, you realize that that's not true. And Copernicus challenged this idea of the geocentric theory with the heliocentric theory. He was wrong about that too, but he was closer to right than the church had been. And the church, fearing a loss of power, really tried to stomp out what was effectively really nothing more than an actual celebration of God. Because again, humanity has transcended even the bounds of what it can observe through its logic, its science, and its mathematics. This was not really a negative in terms of the role of God within the everyday life, but it was a challenge to the church's authority, who had made declarations about what was real about reality, right? And many of these declarations dated back to the Middle Ages. So this starts a whole series of these things. So as an example, some of the names are even on here, for instance. Johann Kepler proved through mathematics that Copernicus' theories were correct. Galileo Galilei, right, was the person who did not invent the telescope. That's wrong, but he did improve upon it. And he observed, as a way of proving Kepler and Copernicus right, he went and observed with his new telescope the moons of Jupiter. And what he observed was, look, if I look out there, I could see Jupiter. I could see its moons. These are observable. And I could see the moons of Jupiter move around Jupiter, which means the theory that everything in the universe revolves around the Earth, which the church had proposed, was wrong, because I found something that doesn't revolve around the Earth. Therefore, this church theory is wrong. And this was a huge factor in helping to discredit this idea that if you don't get your information from approved sources of authority, that somehow your information's wrong. No, these were people actually pushing what they felt was the actual source of authority, human logic and human reason. And these names all kind of fall in there, okay? And it gets to even very deeper things like, do I exist? Or somebody like Hobbes will get to, and John Locke will get to as well, because these are important guys in this concept. Now, the Enlightenment was sort of the same effect that the scientific revolution had on the church's control over the narrative of reality. The Enlightenment was about the political situation of reality. And basically it went like this. There was at the time in Europe a widespread tendency to simply claim absolute monarchs deserve to rule because of divine right. And the idea was, well, God knows everything, God loves humanity, and God wants what's best for humanity. So if I'm ruling your country, I'm only able to do so because God approves me to rule your country, because God has chosen it, because God would never let something bad happen to you. So even if bad things are happening in our country, just think how much worse it would be if I wasn't running it. And this became the logic of divine right, that the kings of Europe, the royal families of Europe, had a divinely given right to rule. Was there logic to support this? No. Was there evidence to support this? Clearly not. But it was the reigning philosophy. And Enlightenment thinkers began to question that. They said, well, wait a minute. What is the reason by which you get that kind of power? Because you declare it? Well, where's your evidence for this? And no evidence was forthcoming. And so most of the Enlightenment thinkers will really focus on political rights. And the most important of them is definitely John Locke. John Locke, British philosopher, who came up with the very, very, very important concept in Western culture of, and this is going to lead to a lot of revolutions, the notion of natural rights. And his idea was pretty straightforward. He believed that human beings were born special. So whether you believe they're special because you're a Christian who believes in God and you believe the idea that God made you in his image, or you're simply a humanist and a rationalist and you believe that humans are simply unique because of our sense of free will, which is more fiercely developed than, say, a dog. Right? Like if I put a dog and I have a dog and I offer it a Big Mac, can it actually choose to refuse the Big Mac? Or will it eat it? Well, I mean, we're talking about creatures that eat their own crap at times, right? So, I mean, obviously they're driven by instinct. Well, humans are driven by instinct too. I can put something in front of you you really want to eat or really want to do or really want to take part in, and you could also make the decision to go, but that's a bad idea. And that concept of free will makes you uniquely special in Locke's world. So Locke felt because of this uniqueness, human beings had natural rights. Just by the virtue of being born, every human, high and low, from anywhere in the world, had these rights. And there are three of them. The right to life, meaning you have a right to your personal health, well-being, and safety. A right to liberty, which in the British sense meant a right to the free will to choose your own destiny and do as you wish. And then thirdly was the right to property. And for Locke, this meant very specifically that you have a right to the fruit of your labor. So if I own a piece of land and I cut down a tree and I turn it into lumber and I turn that lumber into a chair, I have a right to that chair. My labor created the chair. I have a right to it. No one can take it from me. And what Locke believed was the role of government was, one, it rules by consent of the people. That was the social contract that he felt was made between people and government. Because obviously there's very few in government and very many not in government. So the very many could at any time, in theory, just wipe out the few in government. They would win, right? There's many, many more people who are not in government. So what gives people the reason to subject themselves to not exercising that right to just do whatever they want? Well, the idea was there's a social contract. So yes, you have a right to life, liberty, and property. But the moment your rights start to conflict with somebody else's rights, that is the place John Locke felt government needed to exist, to create laws, to make decisions about how to resolve such conflicts. So again, the kind of the old example is, if I like just walking around throwing punches and shadow boxing, do I have a right to do that if you're coming my direction and me throwing punches might accidentally punch you in the face? Do I have a right to punch you in the face? Or maybe it's not an accident. Maybe I just want to punch you in the face. I have a right to liberty. I want to punch you in the face. What should stop me? And the answer John Locke would give is, well, the person you're punching has a right also to their life, their natural health and well-being. So since you want to throw punches and they don't want to be punched, and you have the right to throw punches because you have a right to liberty, but they have a right to not be harmed because they have a right to life, this is a place where government needs to make a law to ensure that your natural rights do not infringe on this person's natural rights. This is a place where a boundary is needed. And that was Locke's philosophy. That philosophy also therefore declares that there is no special unique thing that makes a king because God chose them. They're simply there by consent, by the public not electing to eliminate, remove them violently or otherwise. And the moment that you realize that, then you've got yourself a revolution on your hands. And that thought process helps lead to the American Revolution, which you don't need to know the details of, and it helps lead to the French Revolution. Now, I was asked about the French Revolution. The French Revolution happens 1792 in France. The two-bit summary is a group of middle-class, wealthy people known as the bourgeoisie were angry that they were still being treated legally like commoner peasants from the Middle Ages, because Europe at the time, France at the time, still had an archaic system of social structure based on the medieval concepts of those who work, those who fight, those who pray, those who fight, those who work. Those who pray being the priest, those who fight being the nobility, and those who work being the everyday laborer. Now, the everyday commoner, or right, frankly, everybody else. And so these wealthy, like businessmen, lawyers, doctors that had emerged after the commercial revolution reflected a new reality. The rules and laws of society didn't give these people special status over, say, for example, an illiterate peasants in the fields. And that made a lot of resentment. And I'm sparing a lot of detail about tax policy and debt, but basically there was a need for revenue in the French government. And the king ended up calling together something called the Estates General, which was a medieval assembly of the basically representatives of each of the three estates. And the idea was supposed to be the king was going to put some tax policy and changes in front of these committees. They were going to rubber stamp it. That would give him the legal authority to take whatever taxation he wants out of his people and carry on doing whatever he needed to do economically. This was the king's plan, effectively. It didn't really work out that way at all. Instead, this ended up in a full-blown rebellion. Inevitably, the king is captured, declared an enemy of the revolution of the people of France. He is beheaded. His Austrian wife is beheaded. Was she Prussian? Can't remember now. I'm thinking Marie Antoinette. I think she's Austrian. Austrian, yeah. So she's beheaded. This starts a multi-part war where a revolutionary government in France is trying to fight European armies across the board. Initially, they have very, very, very little success because they're just not very good at this. But if later on, they do get somewhat successful. At the same time, there is a bloody reign of terror caused by some of the revolutionaries who are very, very, very radical, known as the Jacobins, who end up executing a large number of their own supporters for either not being radical enough or being perceived enemies of the revolution. The French Revolution is not a success. It is not to be glorified. Unlike the American Revolution, which led sort of, to a objectively positive force in the world existing in the country of the United States, the French Revolution led to incredible amounts of bloodshed, turned itself against its own people, and in the end, it actually ends in the figure of Napoleon, who rises to power as an emperor at the end of the French Revolution, declaring that he was the heart and soul of the French Revolution, while also going from being a king running France to now an emperor who actually conquers a huge part of continental Europe, and even had ambitions to go so far as to conquer the Americas as well. So the American Revolution and the French Revolution are deeply tied, as is the Haitian Revolution, because in the middle of Napoleon's rule, the Haitians, which was a slave colony of France, rebel. And when they rebel, they are successful in basically throwing off the French in the island of what they called Haiti. It's the island of Hispaniola. And so when they throw off the French overlords there, Napoleon finds himself suddenly without any real easy access to a port of operations that he could control, refit, and protect in the waters of the Western Atlantic near the coast of the United States. And so what he ended up doing was offering to sell the Louisiana Territory to America, which we bought, right, under Thomas Jefferson. So massive impact these sorts of things had, and a lot of sort of weaving in and out together. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Communism. Rich, I'm going to hold off on communism. I think I'm going to do a big thing in class on it, and I definitely have a video on communism in China. So rather than kind of repeat it now, let me go through my library and see what I did last year. I feel like I have a pretty deep. I'll do Soviet communism in class for sure, um, and we'll talk about sort of its beginning. The beginnings are pretty straightforward. The Russian state was run like terrible. I mean, we talked about it, actually. We talked about Rasputin and his control over the royal family and how bad that went. And the bottom line is the communism starts in the Soviet Union through a professional revolution of sort of trained intellectuals who are able to rally enough of the common people to attack the not attack but rather rebel and capture some major Russian cities. There's a fairly long dragged out war between these Bolshevik communists and the royalists who were trying to reestablish the monarchy. The Soviets or the communists win and create the Soviet Union, and Murder Incorporated happens from there. As every communist regime from that day forward will become the actual worst killing machines on planet Earth in human history, murdering untold numbers of their own citizens and others in their attempt to sort of create a workable version of a system that was never going to work. Um, Monroe Doctrine. So we don't really cover the Monroe Doctrine here. I don't think you have to worry about that really at all. Why do Europeans respect the Monroe Doctrine? Real simple, right? If I tell you, don't you dare come over to my house because I got a shotgun and I'll shoot you. Well, the first question is, did you want to come over to my house in the first place? It's a long ride for you. It's a long ride. So that's kind of the truth. I mean, the Atlantic Ocean is and remains the most effect. I mean, the Western Hemisphere is really a long landmass that is divided from everything else on planet Earth by two massive bodies of water. Those are still real barriers to this very day. It's very true. Russia's not invading the United States anytime soon. That's not going to happen. China's not invading the United States anytime soon. That's not going to happen. You know how difficult it would be to maintain a major invasion over, like, the Pacific Ocean? I can give you a sense of how hard it is. That's why there's an America. Because the British had a hell of a time maintaining their military during the American Revolution because of the distance of travel. And that's still true today. So a huge part of why the Monroe Doctrine is obeyed is because it was the kind of threat a person can make knowing it was never, ever, ever really going to be challenged. Now, I mean, that's not a thing that we really cover in the course, but there you go. Okay. Post-World War II factors such as Green Revolution, worldwide organizations like the UN. Sure, I could do some stuff with that. Do you have any effective methods for study? I do. What is the best way to study? I can go over that. AI. Who's AI? And what do you want to do with AI? I don't know. No, AI can help you. I'll show you again how to do that. Safavids definitely show up. Tamerlane has shown up. He has. Let's do this, actually. I'll tell you what. So this gives me a bit of a plan. I could use a drink. Let's take a 4-minute break. We'll reconvene at 9 o'clock. I'm going to go on break for just 4 minutes. Don't go anywhere. Go get a drink. Go to the bathroom. Go do what you got to do. And I'll come back in 4 minutes and we'll continue on with these. I'll talk about how to study, what I think is a good, effective method for doing it. It's not going to be particularly clever. Spoiler alert, you want to practice, practice, practice. It's the only way to get good at a test. Science has shown that. The way you get good at tests is to practice tests. That's the way you get good at them. All right, so 4-minute break. I'll be back in a second. I want to get a drink. I want to refill this. This sucker's empty and I need more. Very sad. And we'll be back. All right, so 1 second. I'm back. All right, let's go. All right, I'm refilled. Grab my chance to get back to the machine, get going. The audio stream's current bit rate is lower than the recommended bit rate. Okay, how do we fix that? Stream status, excellent. Is that because I had it on mute? I don't know. I don't know. My analytics look good. Connection's good. I don't know. How's the audio? Yo, how's the audio? Y'all gotta tell me. Alright. Who knows? Okay, let's carry on. Very good. Alright, so, post-World War II factors. Yeah, I could do that. So basically when you say that, you're saying, tell me about the Cold War world. Alright? Basically, the moment Hitler eats that bullet and they burn him with gasoline behind the Reichstag, World War II is not exactly over because, of course, the Japanese theater remains, but the Cold War does immediately begin. There is no doubt. The Cold War immediately begins. You can maybe make the argument the Cold War began before then. So the Cold War is, again, this ideological standoff between the world's two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States. And the idea was the United States was going to be pushing, from that point forward, the agenda of U.S. politics and U.S. economics, which, again, at the close of World War II, there's no sort of guarantee, by the way, that this was like going to be the winning theory. Even though more people in the world nowadays follow the sort of basic premises of U.S. society and Western society in general. No, it was not the case at all in those days that communism, for example, could not have emerged as the winning thing. At least not in sort of the surface level. You know, if you look at the factors behind everything, it probably was never going to work, communism. It wasn't going to work because it never did work. But that certainly wasn't clear to everybody. It wasn't clear to anybody, really, that communism was like this doomed to fail system. So, in order to prevent that, a lot of things happened during the Cold War that were each of these sides trying to basically twist the world in the direction that they wanted. So, as an example, Green Revolution. Green Revolution is a good example of this kind of. So, there was basically three political positions you could take as a nation in the Cold War. You could either align with the U.S., align with the Soviet Union, or be what was called non-aligned, which is to say, I'm not taking a side in this thing. Now, non-aligned countries, if they were clever, were actually often able to basically play both the U.S. and the Soviets against each other for the benefit of the non-aligned country. So you'll see some of this in India, you'll see it in Egypt. There are a couple of countries that are really pretty good at kind of taking some aid from both sides and making kind of loose arrangements and promises, whatever actually really promising anything specific. Because, of course, as long as, you know, it's weird. It's like, okay, I'm going to put more effort into getting you to date me than I am into getting you to stay with me. Right? Because, like, once I've got you and we're dating, like, that's it. Like, here we are now. Like, we're a couple. And what I need to do to maintain that is different than what I need to do to start that, right? So if I'm going to try to convince you to join the U.S. and do things the way the U.S. does it, it's got to be a really good offer, right? I got to think that long term, this is a better decision for me. Well, I got the Soviets making offers too. So, you know, if I just never commit to either one of you, I could just keep collecting these gifts, offers, these whatevers, and the pot of what you're offering me keeps going up and going up and going up, and I just never, ever, ever commit. That's difficult, of course, because you're basically, you know, bluffing, right? You're kind of telling these groups that, hey, yeah, I'll join your side, but you got to make it worth my while, and you just keep kind of putting it off. Well, suppose I decide, you know what? Nah, you're too much work. I don't want to date you. Peace. I'm out. Never mind. I'm good. I'm all right. Well, then the other person that you're interested in knows that they have no competition anymore. So why would they treat you well in any sort of alignment agreement that they might have then? So if they call your bluff, you could be in trouble. But there are countries who do pull this off fairly well. And so one of the things that kind of come out of that is something like the Green Revolution. So let's talk about the Green Revolution. Now, the Green Revolution is worth talking about because people... What the hell? I don't know why that's there. That's got nothing to do with it. People who hear the term, especially young people, think, oh, it's about like saving the planet. No, it's like the dead opposite of that. It's about saving people. So here's the reality, right? Nowadays you have all these right here, non-GMO. If I type in non-GMO, here you go. There's a whole non-GMO project, right? Protect you from what's in your food. Your customers want to know about your commitment to non-GMO. They want to know that you didn't use this. They want to know that there's no fertilizers in there that are toxic. They want to know that you didn't spray your crops with pesticides that are toxic, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is this is a mark of food quality, right? Or if they say organic, if they say things like free-range chicken and so on. Here's the reality. This is the kind of thing a very rich nation can afford to do. That's reality. So congratulations. The United States is so rich, we can afford to make less food for our own people and accept higher prices on our food. Now, you might say, well, no, I didn't say that. I just want, a chicken that's not pumped full of hormones. All right, fair enough. So do I. But if you're starving and I say to you, look, a huge portion of your country starves every day. We have a way to get more food to more tables to stop them from starving. That way includes genetically manipulating foods, making it so vegetables grow larger, fatter, plumper, and feed more people than they ever could without interference from science. We're going to spray your crops with intense chemicals that murder any insect that tries to feed upon them, ensuring you have full crop yields. We're going to be putting hormones in your animals and so on. This is the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was not, let's make the world a more organic place. It was the opposite. It was using mechanization, fertilizers, pesticides, special irrigation methodologies, all to ensure that developing nations, that's the word we use today, we used to call them third world nations back then, nations that are the ones on the front line of human poverty, are able to actually feed their people. This worked. This worked. Now, does it get critique? Sure, right? People don't want GMO and they don't want hormones and they don't want pesticides. But again, you can make that choice if you're 20 pounds overweight. If instead, though, 20% of your country dies every year from starvation, if famine is a problem your nation actually experiences on a regular basis, if a huge portion of your people live under the international poverty line in terms of what they have, then getting them food under any circumstances as cheaply as can be done to ensure maximum coverage of your people has to be a moral and ethical good compared to, well, but you hormone the chicken. Like, who cares at that point? I mean, the bottom line is people are starving. You can choose to say, I'm all right, I'm good. I'll take 20% less food created if it means it's healthier food. You can make that choice when you're 20% overweight. When your people are starving, you can't make that choice. And it's immoral for you to say to somebody who is starving, you should be eating healthier. Like, man, you are living in a fantasy. People do not want to see themselves, their family, and their neighbors starve. And they absolutely will take the hormone chicken if that means that they can live. And so that was what the Green Revolution was. It was a way to, an international effort, really, in order to do this. Now, if you look, it even says here where it came from. The Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation were heavily involved in its initial development in Mexico, right? So, when? Well, late 1960s. Well, yeah, no kidding. A decade and a half into the Cold War, two major European American companies, as well as others throughout the world who were, implementing this in other places, began to use the technologies of the, very modern world to make developing countries like them more because they helped to solve a major issue. Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. So you can say India, this was used. And to great effect, it was used. It was used in Mexico. It's used around the world. And this right here is the takeaway. What was the Green Revolution? Studies showed the Green Revolution contributed to widespread eradication of poverty, averted hunger for millions, raised incomes, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, reduced land use for agriculture, and contributed to declines in infant mortality. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, no kidding. Well, I went over the Enlightenment already. If you joined us late, I'm sorry about that. But the Enlightenment was earlier on in our lecture, Mr. Heimler. So anyway, but 100%, the Green Revolution is a moral good that saved millions and millions of lives among the poorest people in the world. Now, it is what it is. Like, that's what it was, and it was undoubtedly something that people were far more likely to do than people were far more likely to. It was another avenue of the Cold War, basically, right? It's, I don't want to shoot Russians, so how do we compete with Russians? And we compete by outmaneuvering them in ways that win hearts and minds. And this was one of those methodologies, okay? All right, so I think I covered that to its extent. How to study? Yes. Best way to study? Yes. Okay. Safavids and Tamerlane. I went over Safavids in one of the last ones. But the biggest thing with the Safavids is that they're a Shia empire in a world that typically has Sunni empires, and that they were a gunpowder empire and a land-based empire in a world that was transitioning to sea-based empires. So they were kind of a, sort of like kind of an outlier in a lot of different ways. And again, I went over them already. I don't want to do it twice. Let's see. Again, we did Enlightenment. Do you have any recommendations? I'll say I do. On what to study more? Yeah. What about the Atlantic Revolutions? We did those. So the Atlantic Revolutions, that would be, we talked about those earlier. That's the Haitian American revolutions. Some people often consider the French Revolution a part of it just because it is fairly close to the Atlantic. But those are the big ones, the Haitian, and then Latin American revolutions as well. Again, that falls into that as well. All right, so let me talk about ways to study. So ways to study. Ways to study are like this, right? Here's how I say you study. Number one, I was asked here, is there a particular time period we should focus on? Yes. So let me show this again. I showed it in class the other day, but why not? AP World Course Description. Okay. Anyone can access this. This is legit public knowledge, all right? So, the AP World Course Description goes like this. It tells you flat out. I mean, there's no secrets, right? This is all public information. Pardon me while I scroll through here and chat while I do it. It tells you flat out what parts of the test are tested and in what proportions. And so, again, I always say you want to sort of, eliminate as much stuff as you can at the same time. So here's the list. This is reality. The reality is you want to be focused. Again, I go back old school. Going back 6-7 years and beyond, before that, the course was actually 6 units, broken up completely into time periods. And even, that, and those dated way back to like 600 CE. I still think about and I still approach the course by time period. So yeah, it's got 9 units, but I don't think of it that way. I think of it by time period. So for me, the sweet spot is to know your 1450 to your 1900 stuff like the back of your hand. Know it, know it, know it, know it. Because the essays do not, the DBQ, for example, does not extend before that date. It will not go back to 1200. There's only one of the LEQs that is going to go back to 1200 as a possibility. Maybe you choose your LEQ. Whereas 2 of them will fall within the 1450 to 1900 date range. So 2 of your 3 LEQ choices are in this. Your DBQ is not guaranteed to be in this. It could be in the last time period, but has a very high likelihood of being in this. And you can see for yourself, it's the biggest proportion of material in the course. So even if it's not one of the essay choices, they do this intentionally. Let's say, for example, they do a Unit 8, 7, or 9 essay. Well, then they have to test Units 3, 4, 5, and 6, the 1450 to 1900 time range. They have to test that more heavily in other areas of the course. So that means the multiple choice is going to feature it in greater proportions. So, no matter what you do, it's the best things to know. It just is, or 100%. Now, you want to know everything. But that's also what does that mean to know everything? It means you shouldn't leave any black holes in your knowledge. You should know something about everything. So, what I tend to tell my students is, and I say it to my students who are my students here tonight and those who are not, number one, know what's going on at the same time in these time periods. So, for example, if you go to this document, the AP World Course Description, it's not the most elegant way of doing this. I've shown other ways to do this. But you can take this document as is, right? You can open up ChatGPT. ChatGPT, AI, Vagno, you hate AI. Yeah, I know. I hate it so much. That's why I pay for 7 subscriptions to 7 different services. You're right. I despise it. You take this thing. You pop the link into ChatGPT. You tell it, I need you to break down, and we did this in class, but I'll do it again. I need you to break down for me a list of all the major topics of each of the time periods covered by this AP World History course description. Arrange it by dates so I know which events, eras, states are occurring. Couldn't spell at this. I still can't spell at the same time as others. And let it do its thing. You got time, hit the deep research button and come back after you get yourself some dessert. Let it do its thing. And it will give you what you need. It will tell you, okay, these are major things that are going on in this era, right? And so some of this stuff, the way they've listed it, I might go, okay, I need to know a little bit more. Because, for example, 1450 to 1750, okay, but what's going on in this time period? Where are they? Who are they? What states are there? Etc. There are other more traditional ways. You can get, for example, a timeline that shows regions of the world, right? So you could do this as well. And you could do something like this and something like this. All right? I think is this Freemanpedia? It looks like a Freemanpedia. Or something like that, which is a little bit sort of easier to read. Rand McNally, right? Now, that's, very ancient stuff. But there's all kinds of timelines like this. Here's one here. Here's one here. Here's one here. They may seem complicated, but they're not really as complicated as they look. I'll give you this one as an example. Is an Etsy poster, God help us all. Fine. Let's zoom in. Okay. So if I look at this, forget Bronze Age, all that, modern period. I mean, most of the course is right here, right? So give you an example. Let's find a picture. Okay. You've got the Black Death listed here. At the same time as it looks like you have the Aztecs coming to power here. The Mali Empire is going here because it's regional, right? It looks like this is Sub-Saharan Africa. See, it's got regions here. So even a map like this, which, I'm sure you could find it somewhere. I might have to buy this for school for next year, maybe. I don't know. I need something like this, right? But you can see, for example, here are the Mongols and what they're doing. And here's the Mongol Empire here, the Golden Horde here. You can see that during the age of, it looks like these are Japanese samurai. You also have the Qing, but you also have the Mughals. The Ottomans are in the middle of their thing. The Enlightenment is going on in Europe. That's how you sort of look at it. This is helpful to know. Because when it comes to the course, I am telling you right now, the ability to understand what goes on in any particular period is a powerful tool. So that's one way in which I would study. Start thinking about the course like that. The second way to study, without a doubt, is to do practice. Now, where are you going to get your practice? So let's say you're one of my students. If you're one of my students, I've already given you a bunch, but I will re-unlock everything that's on AP Classroom for you to look at. Especially the multiple choice is all self-grading. You can check it, you can do it, you can look and see what you got wrong, and it'll even tell you why your answers are wrong. If you're not one of my students, Hopefully your teacher uses AP Classroom every single day. Why do I say that? Because AP Classroom is 100% a not a useful tool, an essential tool, right? So AP Classroom goes like this. Let me log into it. What are you kidding? Password, let's go. All right. AP Classroom, this is the teacher's end of things, right? So let me kind of show you what it looks like for those of you who care. So here's my courses. Okay, fine. Now, if your teacher doesn't use it, and I know there are teachers who don't use this that teach AP, because I've tutored kids who have teachers who they've never even shown this to their students. I have no... Okay, sorry. I thought that might be something important. Okay, now... right here, you have every single unit laid out, right? The same units, I literally just clicked off it, but the same units that we were just looking at, laid out like this. Each one, let's just take Unit 3. Each one has topic questions and progress checks. I am telling you now, the AP asked me last week, hey, how do you guys use your progress checks? We put a lot of work into those. Do you guys use them? What does that mean to me? It means they expect you to know the progress checks. That they're probably, trying to sort of lead these as their sort of cutting edge way of teaching students. Now, the progress checks are not always going to be the same kind of questions that you would get on the AP exam. I'll give you an example what I mean by that. So these are not necessarily AP questions, but you can see they are in the style of AP questions, right? So how do you learn to read data? You do it by doing it and getting better at it. And if you pick the wrong answer, just as an example, if you pick the wrong answer, let me pick the wrong answer. Why can't I pick an answer? Am I not allowed? I might not be allowed. I'm not cool enough. I'm not a student, I guess. But if you pick the wrong answer and you go check it, it'll actually tell you, okay, here's why it's wrong, and it'll tell you why the right answer is the right answer. So have your teacher unlock this and make it available to you. You would have had to have signed up for an account, or you couldn't be taking the AP exam. So it's not something they have to go through. You should have an account for this. In addition, each of these also has a bucket of topic questions about specific things and videos about every topic in the course. So someone asked me, hey man, Green Revolution, boyo, what do we need to know? Well, okay, you don't have to believe me. Go ahead and go find it. Here, technological advancements, debates, boom, boom, boom. The Green Revolution is going to be somewhere in here. I'd have to find it. But there'll probably be a video that talks about it somewhere here. Anti-malaria policy, UN development report, all this stuff. Again, I'm not going to read all these. But you can go through all these and look for things if you want that help you. I mean, these are boring. They're boring. I'm not going to lie. It's some teacher in a bad microphone in a room with a bad echo, with a white background, having really just reading off a script. But it is the material. Also, all these have questions that you can do. Some are FRQs. You should look at them. Some are MCQs. You should do them. This is all there. You don't need to be assigned it. And then lastly, the most important thing you have as a tool are these 3 practice exams. Now, in my students' cases, I've assigned 2 of them. I'm not yet assigned the 3rd. Tomorrow, I assign the 3rd. I've not yet assigned the free response questions. I'll do that tomorrow, just as, here you go, guys, go get them. But I am going to assign this and tell them, hey, guys, do this over the weekend. Do it legit. Give yourself 55 minutes and see how you do. Because if you take all 3 practice exams and you've looked over material here, all this stuff, you want to know about the Cold War? Here it is. You want to know about the end of the Cold War? Here it is. You want to know about whatever you like. These things are all here. Oh, I don't know about Latin America. All right, no problem. So then go ahead and find it. It's in here. I'd have to look at the exact, each of these things to find exactly where it's at. But it is here. Hold on. Probably right here. Nah, too soon. Too soon. Indigenous responses to state expansion. So here's British imperial rule. There'll probably also be stuff in here about the Latin Americans as well. So that stuff is all available to you. So absolutely you should do that. And then there's even a review. So this is on-demand review. What does that mean? Well, literally they did at the time, every year they have done a sort of live review. This is something that's gone on for ages. It used to be something even the New York State Regents did, Regents Review. And this has been going on for 3 years now, where I guess this is the 4th year. I don't know if they're doing it 2025 on demand. Let me find out. 2025 on demand AP review. Hold on. They didn't do it this year. They were focusing on getting the blue book working. Okay, that's why. So anyway, but you could watch these, and I would watch these. These were videos done by the College Board before the tests were given, right before the tests were given, with information, how to do it, practice MCQs, practice LEQs, practice DBQs, and like, it's worth your time. Just put it on in the background. Just put it on in the background. So, and I'll assign this to everybody in my class, right? I'm not going to play the audio right now because it'll just interfere with my audio. Yeah, McBeardsley over here, he may not be the most exciting guy on planet Earth, Mr. Mason Lajarot, but, and some of it is going to be really basic, okay? Like, don't worry if you don't get 100%. No one gets 100%. I told you that. Stop. I don't get 100%. Who cares? All right? But he'll go through questions. They'll do some examples. They'll explain how to look at a document. All that's useful. It is useful. It is worth your time. I don't think you can. You could up the speed. So, like, if you're like, all right, cool, I can do this at 2x speed and still hear this guy and understand what he's saying. Oh, hold on. YouTube don't like that I'm doing a video in a video. Give it a second. That probably screwed with my connection. I bet I'm getting a little bit of herky-jerky stuff going on. All right, give it a minute. It will correct. Okay, so the where was I? Anyway, that's the ways I would study, and I would the practice is the way. There is no better way to study for a test than practicing the test. There is no other way that's better. That's scientific. You don't have to believe me. Google that. It's a fact. It's been proven. It's been studied. The best way to do good on a standardized test, a test that is basically the same every year, is to practice the test. That is 1000% the best way. You'll start to see words over and over again. You'll start to see language over and over again. You'll start to see lots of things like that over and over and over and over again. So, yeah, that's without a question. Without a question, that is the best way to study. The other way I personally really like is not found here, but is found on that AP World FRQ section. And go into these and read the student responses. Read them. Read them and grade them. I think that is a very useful tool for the writing. Read them all. And don't even ask yourself, like, all right, well, this kid's, like, these were typed, right? Because they were graded digitally. So, okay, this one obviously sucks, therefore it doesn't deserve the points. No, don't do it like that. Look for ones that are getting the points when you're not sure why, and find out why, and they'll tell you why. It says what they did right and what they did wrong right here. And in addition, ask yourself, could I have done this? Like, if I had to write this, could I have done a job as good as this or better? Could I have earned this point? If this kid earned the point for, say, B, could I have done a better job than that? If the answer is yes, that's a really good sign. And you'll know, you won't be able to lie to yourself about that. You'll be able to read it and go, okay, that's the standard, then that's the standard. I think knowing the standard is critical, right? Knowing how fast you have to go to win the race is an important thing. This is that. This is how much do I have to write? How good does my writing have to be for me to succeed? Right? If you look at these, and I'm telling you, like, this is an SAQ section, right? Look how much information is in 4C here, right? Look at all that information. Compare that to the last one you did and how much you typed, right? And then ask yourself, geez, did this kid get all the points? You know they didn't. He got 1. They didn't earn the point for the first one. They didn't earn the point for the third one on this. Despite the fact they wrote all that, no point. And imagine if you wrote a third that. Do you think you likely got the point? No. This is my point about looking at other people's stuff, comparing to what you've been doing, and going, where do I stand? Am I in a good place? Are my standards better than this standard? Or am I in a bad place? My standards are worse than this standard. That's definitely the way to do it. All right. Anything else from anyone else? It's an hour and a half in since we started. I'm kind of tired, but I have a little bit left in the tank if people have other questions. You're not bothering me. Feel free to pop in. I'd like to know who went to the trouble of making a Stephen Heimler account with his face on it. That's interesting to me. He joined 4 days ago. Wow. That's awesome. I'm like a celebrity now. What the heck is this? Okay, great. Nice meme account. All right. The guy went through the trouble of actually making videos, which is incredible. Good meme account. All right. So, anybody else? Anything else? Are we cooked or cooking? Hi, Ray. Ray, you still have the best hair in the school. Well, I made lamb stew tonight, so I cooked. You're not cooked. Hold on. Ray, tell these people to calm down. Would you please? Like, tell them to calm. So Ray is a perpetual worrier, all right? Ray is a perpetual worrier. He was worried all last year. Same nonsense. Same crap. Ray did fine. Ray, what did you get? I don't remember. You know why I don't remember? Because I know it's fine. A 5. Ray Tang got a 5. If a man could spend that much time worrying about his hair and still get a 5, the rest of you are going to be fine. All right? So calm down. Relax. You know, what the hell are you worried about? Do I look worried? I'm not worried. I'm going to do just fine. I did a practice, Lee, and got a 2. Says who? Who graded your LEQ? ChatGPT? See, dude, I cheated on my Spanish Regents. Don't be dropping that stuff in my chat. Yeah, Ray says, study how to write the essays, and he spells essays very wrong. Not a good sign. So anyway, no, for real though, like, don't worry. What the hell are you worried? Do you not understand? How do I put this? Here's an example. So a study was done ages ago. This is a real study. It was done ages ago. And the study was basically, does taking your little baby, like a little baby, does reading it stories from, like, taking it to museums, playing classical music while your baby's in your womb, taking it to a museum to look at, like, very fancy paintings when it's like a little baby. Does this actually help make your baby smarter? Does it actually help make your baby have better outcomes in life? If you introduce it to, like, these really, really complex things, you don't CoComelon it, right? Like, what does it actually help? And what the study discovered was no, it doesn't do you any good whatsoever to take your baby to go see a Van Gogh painting, or to play Mozart to your child while it's in your womb, or anything like that. It doesn't help at all. Because what is helping is that if you're the kind of parent who's willing to go through the trouble of trying anything possible to help your child succeed, your child's going to succeed. In other words, it's not what you're doing, it's the fact that you care in the first place that's going to be the insurance policy that ensures you do well. Got it? So if you're tuning into a chat at 9:35 at night on my Dinky Shoreham YouTube channel to watch me mutter at you about AP World History 3 nights in a row, with my 2 fake swords in the background, my Chinese statue down there. Where's my guy? Hey, hold on. There he is down there. All right. That's Guan Yu, Chinese god of war. And whatever the crap I got over there. I mean, and watch me sip on, my little matcha drink. I mean, really, calm down. Yeah, it is cool, Ray. I got it as a gift from a student once. Super cool. I've never gotten rid of it. All right. I got my Mao Zedong coin here, too, that I was given the other day as a gift as well. I won't say who gave me that. I don't want to out them. You'll be fine. Calm down. Anyway, I'm done ranting. The longer I stay on this, the more likely I say something I regret. So we're going to call it there. The next time... Alright, Ray. You should admit stuff like that, bro. Certain things in this world you don't post on the internet, man. Like, those things are forever. I would not recommend. Anyway, so the next time we'll do a stream will be the night before the test. Okay? It'll be kind of a free-for-all. So between now and then, be thinking about what it is that you... Don't think. Stop thinking. Go practice something. Go try something. And then see how it is. All right? I'll put that night we'll put the link up. or that day in class we'll put the link up and we'll go from there. All right, we'll figure it out. Don't worry, I ain't worried. It'll be fine. Look, the worst thing that happens is you get a 1. Okay, so what? You're still going to get married. You're still going to go to college. You're still going to pay taxes. I got news for you. If your genetics are bad, you're going to lose your hair. It is what it is. Nothing's going to change. All right, so, yeah, that's it. All right, gang. Have a good night. We're going to call it there, and I'll catch y'all tomorrow.